Hi, and welcome to A Slice of Security. I'm your host, Kyle McKay. A Slice of Security is an interview-style show about two of my favorite things, cybersecurity and pizza. In each episode, my guest and I will discuss a specific cybersecurity theme. In addition, we'll also rate and review a slice, or maybe two, of pizza from a local restaurant. This show has been created with the intention of bringing fun, real-world, and agnostic information, best practices, and success stories to the cybersecurity community. My guest this week is Brett Hacking. Brett is a senior security analyst with extensive security experience, ranging everywhere from incident response to public cloud. On this episode, Brett and I will be discussing the many facets of cybersecurity in the public cloud, including cloud sprawl, cloud misconfiguration, and app dev integration. This week, our pizza review is on Coco Brooks. There are two questions located within this episode. Comment here with your answer to those questions for a chance to win a prize. Today we're joined by a former colleague of mine and a friend of mine, Brett Hacking. Brett, I'll throw it to you to introduce yourself, and let's try to get to know you before we start talking about cybersecurity.
Sure, Kyle. Thank you for having me. I know it's your first episode. Really looking forward to it. So I've been in the cybersecurity field for about 7-8 years now, dedicated, but I've been in IT for a few years longer in prior roles. So no, it's been great. Really enjoy the field and, always learning. Things are always changing. So really looking forward to participating in this. It's going to be good.
Thanks, Brett. So before we get into the kind of the meat and potatoes of this interview, or probably why everybody is here to hear about our topic today and kind of get into the weeds, I'm going to throw it to you for us to kind of get to know you a little bit better. Do you have a favorite movie?
Oh, this is easy, actually. Step Brothers.
Step Brothers.
I can recite them movies start to finish. Love it. Ferrell's a genius.
You love Will Ferrell, huh?
Classic. Oh, yeah.
Okay. That's a good choice. I've only seen it once. I must admit, it never really gave me any sort of lasting impression. It was a funny movie, but it's nothing that I ever felt the need to watch over and over again. How many times do you think you've seen it?
Oh, 25 maybe.
Oh my goodness.
John C. Reilly. Oh yeah, those two.
Okay.
Like, it's the best.
Okay, I might have to check it out again.
It's not the most mentally stimulating movie, but there's the best liners I've ever heard in any movie ever. So classic.
What are some of your hobbies? Do you play any sports? Do you do crocheting, knitting? What kind of things do you like doing?
Not the latter for sure. A little bit of basketball. I think I'm quiet last couple of months with all the COVID stuff going on, but usually I'm playing once a week kind of thing during the rest of the year. So honestly, I can't wait to get back into it. But that I'm into cars as well. Just kind of love detailing a little bit on the side.
Last show that you binge watched? Oh.
This is embarrassing, actually. I watched, I feel actually I was forced into this show, actually, but Too Hot to Handle was probably the last.
That's on Netflix, right?
It is, actually. Yeah.
Okay. I think I've seen it. What is it about? Just a quick summary?
I don't want to ruin the show for people who haven't seen it, but they put all these crazy people in a room.
Okay.
They're all very sexually charged, and I think they're looking to date and hook up and make money.
Okay.
You cannot do any of that. Well, you can't make out or hook up or these things. And they're all pretty, I would say, narcissistic people. And they put these people in a room. And the more of that you do, the less money is in the prize pool for everybody.
Okay.
So it's trying to change a whole lifestyle, I guess, or it's kind of like a social experiment kind of show, but really interesting.
To be honest, it actually doesn't sound that bad. I used to watch actually a lot of Big Brother back in the day. This sounds like Big Brother on steroids, maybe. Do you still do any video gaming?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah? What's two questions? What are you playing now, and what would be your favorite game of all time?
I'm still playing games. Yeah, I'm playing right now Valorant, which is pretty new. Still play a lot of CS as well.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Global Offensive. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So that'd be your favorite game of all time at this point, would you say?
Of all time, I think 1.6 would still be my favorite of all time, but I haven't played that in 10 years or something like that.
Wow. To make pizza dough, pretty much no matter what recipe you look at, a traditional pizza dough recipe has 5 ingredients. Question for you without using Google. Do you know what those 5 ingredients are?
5? Ooh, more than I thought. I think you got flour.
Yep.
You got some water.
Definitely. Yep.
You got yeast.
Yep.
I'm going to guess maybe a little bit of salt in there.
Yep.
Is this a trick question?
No.
What am I missing here?
Sugar is the last
Sugar.
ingredient.
Oh, yeah. No, I never would have thought of that. I used to actually, but I totally forgot about this.
There you go. Those are the 5 core ingredients. In the vein of what our topic is today, what, in your opinion, would be the 5 core ingredients for a successful security program?
Oh, interesting. I think it depends kind of what your organization looks like. If it's small, medium, large, how big of a team you have, what your objectives are, and kind of what your role is. So if you're like an IT leader and you have responsibility for like a greenfield program, that would look very different than if you're like just an analyst on the ground, right? That's in charge of just trying to cover a whole swath of different pillars.
Absolutely. So pick which hat you want to wear, whether it's the analyst or the leader, and then let's pick five core ingredients from that perspective.
For sure. So I think I'll pick maybe like on the leadership side.
Okay.
To a new program, like a greenfield program, I think first you kind of have to have a bit of a vision for what you want to deliver. So if you have to first know your stakeholders and know what they're looking for.
Yep.
So that could be something pretty generic, like, hey, we want a brand new program. What does it look like to bring us up to a certain level of maturity? Or that may look more tactical, like, hey, here's a very specific project that they need security for, and you build your program around that. So it really kind of depends on your end objectives. But I think, generally speaking, for most, we'll say like small and medium businesses, they want a certain level of monitoring in place and response, and they want to dial in the basic fundamentals or IT or the business to manage your risk. So I think that you've got a little bit of governance, your monitoring team, or just some monitoring in general, and that could be outsourced as well.
Yep.
You want to have some business integration, ideally, for like if you're doing architecture assessments or risk assessments, things like that.
Yep, that's a good one.
You've got some people that have the capability of doing some dedicated like architecture work within your IT teams as well.
That's a great answer.
I think that, if you're bigger, then you've got more of a development focus as a business. You might have some tech ops, or you might have some cloud engineers that are focused on security, and that's definitely growing a lot too. So
nice. Cool. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. I think the business integration, I like that piece quite a bit. That's something I see lacking quite a lot in most organizations. And without that business integration, you're always last to find out about things, and you're not involved in the onset, right? So I think that's a great answer. I like that.
It is, and it's hard to do security. Like if you're the last in the room to know about an initiative that you need to protect or support, ideally it's all about building those relationships first. And then once you've done that and you kind of prove what you kind of lay out what you're going to do, and then you execute on it, then you'll find that I think that transfers other elements within the companies that you're supporting. So
yeah, it's well said. Now here's a hypothetical scenario for you.
Sure.
Before we dive into this delicious pizza, who we will talk about in a second, but my hypothetical scenario is this. Imagine you and I, we decide to create our own pizza business. And in that business, you and I are going to make the dough. We're going to top the pizzas. We're going to prepare them, but we don't have an oven and we don't have a scalable delivery system. So we've decided to leverage Bob down the street, who has a big pizza oven, and he also has a team of delivery drivers. Mm-hmm. What questions or what verification would we want to do of Bob before we actually go ahead and use his service for cooking and delivering of our pizzas?
It's interesting. Like I've thought not about this scenario. Of course, it's pretty off the wall, but a lot of security does come down to supply chain, right? A lot of people are at pretty decent risk of not understanding the risks of a supply chain in general, and like from what that means from like a cybersecurity side. So I think it depends on a few different angles of what kind of business you have, right? In this case, your pizza model, I think you'd want to understand a bit about their capability to continue those services no matter what happens, or they scaled, have the ability for redundancy, like is there multiple places and multiple ovens and things like that.
Yeah.
And factors that weigh into your own business capability and resiliency should something happen, right? If they have one oven and that goes down and you're hooped for days and they can't replace that for a week or a month, and that affects your ability to deliver those services. I think a lot of that really does transfer to cybersecurity as well. But the other element, which isn't true of every business model, is kind of depends on the sensitivity of what you're asking Bob to do. If you're transferring that product to him, do you trust that he's not doing the wrong things with that product, right?
Mm-hmm.
Stealing it, selling it. In this case, pizza is not really very proprietary, of course. Just something to consider for sure.
The reason I asked you this question, and that ties in very well, is doesn't this sound a lot like cloud security? We've now delegated some delivery and the running of our business to some degree, at least the IT portion of it. We've offloaded that to Bob, which in this case, Bob could be Google, could be AWS, could be Azure. Our friend Bob is now responsible for running and handling the final stages of the pizza process, right? Our work together is we're creating the secret sauce. We're making this, 1,000-year-old pizza dough recipe that nobody knows about. And, we're freely handing it over to Bob, who we hope we trust. Does he have a criminal record? Has he stolen pizza ingredients before? Is he going to trade our pizza dough recipe to our competitor down the hall who's also using his service? Those are all questions that, any company may be interested in answering as part of transition to the public cloud. And so those are some of the topics I think we'll get into today as we talk about public cloud specifically. Getting quite hungry here looking at our pizzas. Both of us have just gotten them out of the oven, nice and warm, nice and crispy. Today we're going to be dining on Calgary Classic. I didn't grow up in Calgary, but I believe Coco Brooks has been a staple here in the city for a long time, right?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll go with that. The Coco Brooks, if this becomes a very successful interview with Coco Brooks, I hope you'll sponsor future episodes. So this is my Coco Brooks pizza. Brett and I are both having the exact same one. It's a bacon double cheeseburger. This is a personal size. I don't think they make any other sizes for that matter. So we're going to eat the pizza. We're going to chat about the pizza. We're going to rate the pizza at the end. But in the meantime, we're going to converse and talk about some cybersecurity related questions. So Brett, feel free. I'm sure I'm going to catch you with a mouthful of pizza as I ask you some questions. So that should be entertaining for me and everybody else, and vice versa. First thing I wanted to ask you, though, as it relates to cybersecurity, is what made you first go into cybersecurity?
I actually kind of stumbled into cybersecurity even from IT originally. So when I actually started going to say my original program was networking, and I thought that was the direction I was going to go. And I remember it was probably the second day, and they were doing kind of a walkthrough of all the different programs and the majors. Yep. And the program was brand new at the time. This is back in 2007. And they said, like, hey, we've got this new cybersecurity, or at the time it was called IT security as a major, or I guess technically it was even a branch of a different program. Let's say it was computer systems at the time, and just a bigger component of it versus the other programs. And at the time, they really did a kind of a cool rundown. And I thought, that sounds like the coolest job ever. Like, I can't believe people get paid to do this work. So I knew day 2 into the program, like, okay, I got to switch my major because it sounds really cool. There's a bunch of lab courses, and I still remember having one of the best teachers ever. Was a huge motivating factor for making that shift, was just the amount of knowledge I learned from him at the time. Nice. Was cool. Really, like, I've never looked back, like, loved it ever since. Honestly, it's a really cool career.
Nice. Do you want to give a shout out to your teacher?
Yeah, it was actually Tim Williams at SAFE.
Nice. Yeah.
I'm not sure if Tim's still teaching or not, but fantastic teacher.
We'll make sure to tag Tim on this video when we upload it. Can you tell us about your first role in cybersecurity?
Yep. It's actually my first live. I think there was kind of 2 elements. One was like dedicated cybersecurity. One was a lot of cybersecurity at a smaller company, but just not dedicated. That was my first real exposure to it, really learning security fundamentals. For me, it was doing a bit of server administration at the time, but having elements of cybersecurity as a responsibility. So, like making sure you're keeping systems up to date, understanding the threats, administration of systems, and making sure you set them up the right way and do the right monitoring. And then I really pivoted into like a dedicated full-time cybersecurity role back in 2014.
Nice. I think you and I probably have both seen students, new grads, who perhaps have gone through a security program or a Bachelor of Science program, and they want to go directly into security without having those fundamentals or getting their feet wet in other disciplines, whether it's software development, networking, server administration, etc. What is your opinion on that? Have you had any experience hiring people that come from those disciplines? And what have you seen? What have you not seen?
Absolutely. So I think I've changed my opinion on this a few different times over the course of the years. So originally my view was, unless you built those fundamentals doing those other roles, you're not going to be an effective cybersecurity person. And I've actually switched up my view on this entirely. My thought really is that there's not really enough of a community to fulfill the entire demand that we're seeing as an industry overall.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's not necessarily a benefit to keep it to like a really tight group and not be more inclusive or trying to expand that group out to other people, right? So I think that there's a few things that I've seen, or like the way I would really kind of frame it in the last couple of years is, if you hire someone directly out of school, they may not necessarily have those fundamentals, but you may actually find that they can complement your team really, really well. We try and hire, like my current place, right? We'll try and hire new grads as well, bring them out. We try and find really sharp people. And that really goes a long way for us. You can really find what's their area of expertise. And like one example, like we'll look for people that have the capability of doing more development work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Traditionally, we might look more for network security developers that have learned different skill sets and things like that, or pure cybersecurity majors. The reality is there's so many more people that are capable of really augmenting a team. You're really helping extend what you could do, but you have to find people that are hungry and want to be in that space. I think that's to being successful.
It's actually a very enlightening answer. I like that, because I haven't put in a lot of thought, but I was on the other side of it, similar to what I guess you were previously. If you haven't cut your teeth doing server administration, networking, software development, there's no way you can be successful. But obviously, we've seen successful people come through the system and go directly into security. But to what you just said, it's kind of solidified that in my mind. We don't have a large enough talent pool. We're not going to be able to fill the demand with what we have. And the reality is, if somebody is hungry enough, they have enough desire, they have enough passion, they're going to do better than anybody else anyway. So yeah, I think that's actually really well said.
I do think that one thing you have to be careful of, though, is setting people up for success when you do hire new grads.
Yep.
So expecting them to be, and I think a lot of them feel a lot of pressure as well. Like we'll do like a program where we'll bring in new grads as well. And I think a lot of times what we see is internal pressure that they'll have to immediately be like an advanced or senior resource in cybersecurity. So I think that them having the confidence going into the field is knowing like, hey, you don't have to be perfect. Just have the hustle, the passion, learn on your own time as well, and you'll be successful. And ideally find a place that's willing to invest in you, but also be willing to invest in yourself. And you'll build a better community.
People who do put in their own time, who are really driving at a goal, who clearly want to prove themselves to be somebody who's going to be successful in that field. Doesn't matter if somebody else has a PhD in computer science. If they're lazy and they're complacent, the person who has that passion is going to win every single time. So I think that's great to encourage people like that. If you can find somebody who has that passion, that's the key. In your current role, do you have a particular area of cybersecurity that you tend to focus in on, or is it kind of all over the place?
I would say like my current role kind of shifted a little bit more from incident response, but that's kind of changed, I think, the last like year or two to be a little more broad, but to build up some other analysts as well. So more of like a leadership type role.
Nice.
But still with more of an incident response type focus. Our group has started to build up a lot of additional capabilities. So we've gotten a lot bigger, we've grown a lot. And that comes trying to specialize a little bit more so you can get a deeper focus versus inch deep, mile wide. But incident response has definitely been my biggest focus in the last couple of years.
What advice, and we may have already covered this, I guess, but what advice would you give yourself or somebody just getting into the field of cybersecurity? What would be the one piece of advice that you would give that would probably most benefit that person?
I would say don't be afraid to fail and invest your time in yourself. There's a lot of pressure to just be an expert when you come into the field. And those are unrealistic expectations for new people coming in. The main thing to really focus on is like learn as much as you can, find people that you can pick skills up from or are willing to mentor you a bit if you can, and then try and give back to the community as well. So those are the big things. And for me personally, if I could go back 10 years, it would be take as much training as you can. I've tried to do that, but
In your opinion, what would you say the most neglected discipline or area of cybersecurity is?
the area I can think of that's probably most neglected isn't really in security, but it's more just in doing proper management. So you minimize your risk that becomes more of a cybersecurity responsibility. So my view there is asset management. It may sound like it's not really like a cybersecurity thing, but the better you manage your assets and the better you control them and you get whatever your controls are for your organization, right? The better you manage those assets, it becomes so much easier to do the rest. So like if you're not deploying your tooling correctly, if you don't have good saturation, if you've only deployed a capability, you're really going to struggle. Whereas if you can understand at least the assets or the people that are supporting those assets in their process, you will minimize the risk that's inherent downstream. So I use cybersecurity as a bit like a waterfall. Mm-hmm. You can fix a lot of things like a dam upstream. You can control that flow so you don't end up with a mess downstream.
And so what are some examples of asset management? What would be some assets that are important to maintain some monitoring or control over?
So I think like the threat model of your company is an important factor to consider. But I think generally speaking, there's two vectors that are of primary concern, right? Your users, the assets that they would use, mm-hmm. and then also your public facing assets as well. So those are probably the two biggest ones that are very common almost across the board. Mm-hmm. And if you get those really well, then it's going to do a lot of good for you, right? So you've got a lot of different controls that do a lot of different things. But the thing is, if you don't get your controls out there, don't get good saturation, or if you've only got, minimal capabilities for asset management, you're going to struggle. And that's not true everywhere I've been. But I think that the stronger you have a system like that, it just makes everything else quite a bit easier.
One of those things that you just mentioned, would you say that those would be the most critical areas to start for an asset management program? If somebody maybe starting from scratch, just greenfield, you'd like to get a handle on your assets, let's get proper asset management of our user, whether they're laptops, mobile devices, etc., and our public facing assets. Would that be the best place to start? You get your most bang for your buck out of that?
I've kind of been a little bit torn on this in the past too. Like I see it less of being a function of trying to get like a asset management database and more of an understanding of the actual functions, like the people that are supporting those assets, understanding the life cycle really, really well. Mm. And then you figure out your tooling and you get that deployed and then you measure your saturation. In my opinion, that goes a really, really long way.
On that note, or maybe on the contrary, what area / discipline of cybersecurity would you say is perhaps overemphasized or too much time and effort is spent on for perhaps little reward?
I don't think this is necessarily true in every circumstance, but so much focus on the tools that you buy versus the outcome that you're getting. So AI, machine learning, those are powerful technologies, but some are more overhyped or oversold in my opinion. So I think it really comes down to know the capability you want to deliver and deliver on it versus trying to find a tool to deliver that capability. So you have to make sure you've got the right amount of people to deliver it, that it's meeting your business's needs, based on the integrations and things that you're looking to get as an outcome. Those are the big things I would say.
Yeah, it's funny, like what you just said is couldn't have been summed up better in my opinion. One of the challenges that most organizations have that I've seen time and time again is exactly what you said, right? We'd rather lead with the tool and that'll solve all of our problems, rather than somebody taking the time to really understand, okay, what are the risks that I actually want to mitigate? And then, as you just eloquently put it, reverse engineer it from there. Okay, these are the risks. These are the concerns I have. How do I mitigate those risks? All right, we've got one slice to go. We've been chowing down here on Coco Brooks bacon double cheese. It's been a good slice, I must say. Lots of security left to talk about, but I'd say we go ahead and wolf this last piece down, and let's let the world know what our opinion is of this pizza.
It's a little slice of heaven so far.
It might be reaching a little bit, but what I do like is there's something sweet about this sauce, or something in this is sweet for sure, which I actually quite like. It's quite refreshing.
It's not just your normal marinara. I agree. It's kind of I don't know what they actually put in this. I agree with you though. Really tasty.
Mm-hmm. Crust is nice. Good thick level of toppings.
I feel like it's the perfect size too. Like for a personal, it's not too small. Sometimes it's just like too small of a pizza. Nice thick, lots of ingredients, good thick crust.
Mm-hmm.
The take home is a good option too. Like it's not like you're cooking it from scratch. You're just kind of warming it up. But no, it's been real good.
All right. So I just finished my pizza.
What would you rate it?
I'm comparing against the best of the best. It's a good pizza. Crust, I'm not in love with. Above average, certainly. I do love the ingredients. That sweet sauce is really what kicked it above average, in my opinion. If I was to rate it, I would probably give it about a 6.6 out of 10.
I would give it a 7.8.
7.8. That's a great score. What's the highlight and the low light of this particular pizza in your mind, if you have any?
I think they've got the right amount of ingredients. Sauce is delicious. I think the sauce is what makes this one really good.
Yeah.
I can't really think of a low light here.
I mean, as we both know, cybersecurity is founded to some degree in frameworks, governance, risk management. A lot of frameworks and a lot of those cybersecurity methodologies are great ways to guide a cybersecurity program. Do you have any frameworks that are perhaps, in your opinion, better than others and have given you a little bit more guidance than others?
I think my favorite framework I've ever worked with is probably MITRE's ATT&CK framework, because it's not governance driven. It's based on like real life taxonomy of what different companies are seeing across the globe. And then it's very specific into what those techniques and tactics are that these different groups are using in order to complete their objectives. So that to me has been really, really helpful.
Yeah, I must say I don't have much experience with cybersecurity frameworks myself, but after my conversation with you not that long ago, when you showed me the MITRE ATT&CK framework, I was very impressed by how practical and real world it is in comparison to what we know as some of the more, I guess, mainstream frameworks. Like NIST, of course, comes to mind, which again, it serves its purpose. It has a great message, and foundationally, I mean, it's a good thing, but it can be very abstract, right? There's a lot of interpretation required versus what you're describing here, the MITRE ATT&CK framework. This one might be a difficult one to answer, but how can you define or how can you gauge the maturity level of a cybersecurity program of any said organization? What kind of indications or indicators would you be looking for?
This is an interesting question. And I think there's different ways you can answer it, right? Like if you ask, an organization that's focused on risk management, they could put you on a scale of 0 to 5. I think we almost as a community have to recalibrate what that actually means. So like from what I've seen, just networking with different peers in the industry, a 5 is almost unattainable. Like I've never really seen a 5. So I think you almost have to take it down a notch and say, what makes sense for your company and where should you be? And I think a lot of groups are operating with an objective of saying, I want to get to a 5. And really that shouldn't be your end objective. It should be like, what are the next things that give business value, business enablement, but also protect that organization so that they can be effective. So I don't know if I really have a good answer for you here, other than, to be honest, like the frameworks that I've seen out there aren't perfect in terms of actually grading where you should be and where your peers are. And I was actually discussing this with someone last week, going through that process, right? Like of grading an organization to see where you are. And even if you're better than your peers today, doesn't necessarily mean you will be tomorrow. And that's not necessarily where your end goal might be.
Mm-hmm. So pivoting now to kind of moving away from some of the general security questions to really what this episode is supposed to focus in, talking a little bit more around cloud and public cloud security, get some feedback from you around some of the top concerns and top threat vectors across this space. Anybody who's been around in cybersecurity for any amount of time, as we've gone into the cloud, has heard of the term shared responsibility. For those of you who aren't aware, that shared responsibility is a way for you as an organization to, in effect, share responsibility with the cloud provider. I guess ultimately the risk is always still on the business, but responsibility in this case could be, the responsibility for the networking, the compute, the storage in a cloud environment. It's more than likely provided and is the responsibility of the provider. whereas the data, the authorization, authentication, the identity management, those are all most commonly deployed and managed by the organization or the business. So with that, are there any gotchas or anything that model doesn't quite convey that maybe has come up or surprised you in the past?
I would say that's a great question. I think what I've seen is a lot of the bigger providers will have a shared responsibility model. It's a lot easier to ensure you've turned on the right things if you know what that model looks like. Where I see a bit of a gray area is the cloud organizations that provide a solution that you would integrate with that don't necessarily have a documented shared responsibility model. So you may kind of assume this is what I'm responsible for, but oftentimes it's not always transparent. Are they turning on all the controls on their side? And vice versa, if you have responsibilities, you know what those are. So I think when you look at the more medium-sized cloud providers, that's when there's more to be concerned about, in my opinion. I think there's a little bit less transparency there from what I've seen.
Cool. In this vein, where most organizations kind of start as they dip their toe in public cloud, is typically app teams, development teams, typically dipping their toes and going off and doing their own thing because IT is too slow. As I'm sure you've seen, I know I've seen that almost always inevitably becomes some sort of cloud sprawl. Many have labeled that as shadow IT. So with that, have you had any success managing this sort of scenario without necessarily handcuffing the business?
It's a really good question. I think first thing you have to go into it with is like change your perspective on cybersecurity a little bit when it comes to cloud. I think that like if I were to look 5 to 10 years ago, there was a lot of fear, right? It was more about the fear of cloud than it was, hey, here's a really amazing opportunity for businesses to grow and expand a capability or deliver a capability. So what I've seen is a lot of the bigger providers, a lot of the controls that people have always wanted are there. So like if you look at it, you have to learn what those are, how to turn them on, how to consume them, how to get value out of them. But in my opinion, things that used to be very, very hard to do on premise can become a lot easier to do in the cloud. And the hardest thing I think is always going to be the sprawl. Is less about the control. So like I think challenges we've seen in the past of most organizations is procurement takes time, capacity takes time. If you have a requirement for some physical compute to support that, it's difficult, right? You've got concerns about size, speed, availability, and cloud I don't want to say it takes care of a lot of that for you, but they've made it so it's easier to consume it without that pipeline of, okay, I need to order this, I need to get approvals, X, Y, and Z. So it really clears that up. From a cybersecurity perspective, I think you have to go into it being like, how do you work well in that environment? How do you get a frictionless environment where you have some degree of control and you avoid a scenario where you have like a major data breach, right? That's everyone's worst nightmare. Or being responsible for security and then something like that happens. So I think the biggest thing is if you can get a handle on, get some buy-in from the people who have some skin in the game. So if you go directly to developers, they may not necessarily have the same motivations to put security in place. But if you go to the leads of those teams or managers of those teams, I think you have to work with them, build a relationship first. And I think you have to do a few different things. And like internally on my team, we'll talk about doing security to people versus with people, for people, right? Very different view. And if you just force your controls onto a group, you probably won't necessarily get the same buy-in. So I think the big thing is work with people as a partner, be transparent with what you want your controls, where you want them to be, how you want them to operate. And ideally, you get them as frictionless as possible and repeatable. And I think that's where cloud can really do you a lot of favors, is the repeatability side versus on-prem. I think there's a lot more opportunity for inconsistencies of deployments, things like that, I would say. So if you can figure out how your developers operate, understand the frequency of which they develop code, and then try to get built into their pipeline of when they want a new service, what does that look like? What are the things that are supposed to go into place? And ideally, you figure out their pipeline so you can get built into their process. Versus if your end state is always coming in right when it's built, it's always going to cost you a lot of money as a business, not even just from a cybersecurity side. But ideally, if you can come in early, work with them, get some transparent controls in, build some governance, you'll start to see some really positive outcomes.
So there's two things that come to mind just based on that answer, which I really love. Yeah, of course, we all know there's inherent risk around cybersecurity in the cloud. It makes it so much easier to actually build those controls than ever before. And the other thing, you did mention something around the sprawl, how that's somewhat inevitable. This is a question I was going to touch on a little bit later, but it really ties into that. And I wanted to ask you now is, when it comes to sprawl, if that is in fact inevitable, and you're doing a great job of integrating your controls, being transparent, working with them to build security as a team, which is perfect. That sounds like the very best way to do this. How do you manage that sprawl? Because that sounds like that's inevitable.
So it's a really good question. I don't know if there's a perfect answer out there or perfect solution to it, but what we found is a few different things. And I've experienced it as well, when all of a sudden you'll have one group of developers will have success, and all of a sudden that translates to different groups kind of coming up and supporting different initiatives. I think that's where you get some sprawl from, right? Which is, like you said earlier, it's not a bad thing, but it can create cybersecurity risk if not done the right way. So to get a handle on it, I think ideally you want to make something as repeatable as possible so you can give it to those other groups, be consistent. And then if you come into it and you're like, from scratch, it's going to take you a lot of time if you do it every single time. So whatever you're doing, figure out how to operate similar to how they would, right? Understand their tooling. I think a lot of developer groups, from what I've seen, use some consistent tooling for communications, or tracking tickets, things like that. And if you can understand how they operate, I think you stand to be a lot more successful. And as you build up your framework, you scale out and integrate, then I think you'll see people come and just want to be part of a consistent experience versus building a brand new pipeline of how they operate. And if you capture those success stories, like if you build it, people will come, right? So you have to make sure you build controls that are not, don't have an extreme amount of friction, because that's when all of a sudden things break down and groups will circumvent those controls.
Yeah, that's very well said. So really the end is, there may be some sprawl, and that's inevitable, but the key is, as long as you can get in front of that as soon as possible by implementing consistent controls, that the developing teams don't perceive that as adding a lot of friction and time and effort, then you're more than likely going to be involved or be inherent in wherever they sprawl to. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I would say so. And I guess a little more specifically, things that I've done that have been successful is I've built out cloud standards, and there's I can't remember the group off the top of my head, but there's a whole bunch of cloud standards that are already built across the board. Mm-hmm. Those are very reusable and very, very detailed. You may have to trim those down and figure out what will work for your organization. There's a lot of governance already built, and a lot of it's reusable, but you could also complement that with some tooling. So there's a lot of native capabilities for logging, configuration management. You have to make sure you enable them. And then if you can get some centralized visibility, that's a big thing too. And this is where some tooling can come in if you built enough governance around it. And you can build, ideally, I hear the term guardrails thrown around a lot, which is still a good thing. But basically what that means is you provide kind of the rules of engagement for what it looks like to develop and deliver new services. And ideally your guardrails prevent things from going off the road. So you avoid a big accident of someone enabling something that they shouldn't, but you provide enough flexibility that they can be effective. So if you can build those and establish them, and you've got either some tooling or cloud automation to help you with that, you can, instead of needing manual intervention, turn on or turn off certain things that should or should not be there when either a new environment spun up or if there's a change that shouldn't go into place.
We talked a lot about how to be successful so far with some of the sprawl, which is, of course, a problem that everybody seems to be facing. One of the things that I've pondered in the past, and we've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but we both know that there's this huge elephant in the room when it comes to cybersecurity risk in a public cloud. And that elephant, at least in my opinion, is this risk associated with multi-tenancy. APIs and management endpoints are constantly exposed out to the internet. All you need is an authorization key or some kind of credential to now have access to your entire environment, where that would have been a lot different. If you contrast that to something on-prem, it would have been a lot more difficult to get that same level of access. So how do we rationalize that amount of risk? Just speaking about it, this seems like a heck of a lot of risk. We're sitting on the same set of equipment as maybe our competitor, a hacker, or somebody malicious, right? We're trusting the cloud providers of the world to do their very best in ensuring this multi-tenancy keeps us separate. How do we rationalize it?
That's a good question. A lot to digest there. I think I think there's a few angles to consider, right? The risk versus reward. You're kind of looking at risk versus risk as well, right? So what's the risk if you were to stay on-prem and it took you 6 months to deliver a new capability versus take on some risk, maybe go to a cloud provider and you don't have the reliance on physical compute and you could turn services on tomorrow. Like there's some value, there's some immediate return on investment in taking on some of that risk. So it's one thing to consider. In terms of like the multi-tenancy question, I feel like it's also something we've discussed like way back in the day, physical versus virtual, shared compute for different security purposes. Maybe it's like something like a DMZ versus just your regular business line equipment or industrial control systems. A lot of this has come up in different conversations that I've seen over the years. And I think there's a few options in the cloud, not all of which make sense, but there's things available to you, right? So you could do single tenancy, but it becomes often pretty costly. And then your services you can typically turn on are very, very limited. So that could be a really big challenge. And I've seen in some cases like 8 or 9 times the cost of the multi-tenancy scenarios. Other things you could do, so it's available to you, right? It's better than nothing. And that's typically depends a bit on your level of provider you're working with as well. Not all are created equal. There's also management of encryption keys. So it depends on, do you trust your cloud provider to manage them? I'd say for most organizations, that's probably okay. Not everyone. Governments or defense contractors probably would not. And you could bring your own systems to manage your own keys if you don't trust the big providers or smaller providers. That's an option there too. But really, you can't, you're not going to be able to own all risk or reduce all risk entirely. Some of it you do have to accept one way or another. It just depends on if it's worthwhile for you overall. And I think generally for most organizations, taking on that risk has been beneficial so far. But I think we all know there's always that doomsday scenario of, hey, we're on the same compute. What happens if, could be a competitor on that same system? What happens if they end up with access to your data, or if something happens like a ransomware event and that just transfers into your system? Yeah, I think people are definitely concerned about it. But to this point, I can see why companies are continuing to shift workloads into the cloud. So the one good thing is that if you look at the big providers out there, Amazon's, Oracle's, the Microsofts of the world, they have a lot of skin in the game for protecting and securing those environments. So I can imagine what it would do to their businesses should something major happen, which is a motivating factor as you as a consumer.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer, and that aligns very well with my opinion as well. Not that means it's right, but just because we're thinking the same thing. But the reality is exactly that, right? The reward is there. It's providing business value by having the agility. So there's so many positives that come about. There is of course this inherent risk. There could be a doomsday scenario, as you just put it. And in fact, that probably will happen within our lifetime, I would imagine. Then we're all in the same boat, I suppose. So reward, it outweighs the risk. And when you start to associate that now with the business needs and the business drivers, obvious sense, right?
And I think there's still that responsibility to make sure you turn on all the controls that you can within those cloud environments. That's what's, I think, costing companies more, is not dialing in those fundamentals versus the hypothetical, which, yeah, to your point, very much could happen. But right now, I think it's a lot about mastering the basics.
So when it comes to storage in the cloud, it's not a topic that I've ever done a whole lot of research on. Is there much in the way of concern for organizations to ensure their data is actually being deleted or purged?
I think it really depends on like the provider you're working with entirely. So like the mom and pop type providers out there, I would be much more concerned about versus the larger ones typically go through more stringent auditing. It is a valid concern. I think a lot of that comes down to what can you capture in terms of like contractual requirements as well.
As an industry, we hear a lot about vendor or cloud lock-in. From a risk management perspective, I guess wearing a cybersecurity hat, is that a real risk or a concern when you think about cloud adoption? Is there a certain level of risk you're taking by locking in or associating yourself too much with one set of cloud providers' toolings?
It's a really good question. There's definitely a possibility of cloud lock-in, but from what I've seen, most of the services are fairly easy to turn on and turn off pretty easily. We need to stop treating assets like servers like pets and treat them more like cattle. So really, if you can separate your infrastructure from your application, I think you're in a much better position to not be locked into a provider and be able to scale that to different providers if we need to.
Is there any recommended practices that you've seen for handling what would be under the category of cloud misconfigurations? And in that category, I would put in anything where an administrator could perhaps perform some action that would put the company at a severe level of risk.
Yep. So there's definitely some opportunities there for tooling and alerting and things like that you can turn on. So I may pick one technology specifically, right? So if we look at AWS as an example, you can enable stuff like AWS config, and that way you're tracking what configuration changes are happening. And you can pump all your logs into like a system, like if you have a SIM, and then either you can build your own alerts, or oftentimes they have pre-built ones in your provider, so you get notified when things happen. So it might be like you may care about public S3 buckets, and that should never happen. So you can set up rules that will trigger, and occasionally, like it depends on how you configure them, but you could set up a response to remediate that for you. So maybe that's something you've said should never happen. Or if maybe that's happening occasionally, you just want to be notified, you can on some of the alerting rules there too. What I've seen typically with the cloud providers is the capability is there. You just have to invest the time to configure it and pursue it, validate that it's working, and then oftentimes you're good to go, at least to start with for sure.
Now, when it comes to onboarding new services or perhaps assessing them after the fact, depending on where security is in the life cycle of these things, do you have any kind of standardized approaches to any of the SaaS, PaaS, or infrastructure as a service?
Yep. So I think that for stuff like platform as a service, software as a service, you really have to understand what options are available to you as an analyst or cybersecurity or architect or developer. You have to understand like what are the options, and oftentimes the documentation is pretty decent for what you're able to do and what your responsibilities are. So in the cloud versus of the cloud, and in the cloud, if you go through those documents, oftentimes they'll talk about logging, auditing, encryption, change management, backups, and really understanding those is really key. I think if you can, is more automation. If you can automate and instrument your technology, that just it gets deployed that way, you're going to be way better off. Versus, I would say, don't go into the cloud with manual processes for everything. See how much you can automate and instrument, so that you're not having to continuously spend your time looking for the basics, and instead you're consuming those services that you've enabled.
Do you have any experience thus far handling what we kind of know as an industry now as microservices? I've certainly been involved in a lot of conversations and seen a lot of uptick in taking what we would previously have called a monolith application and trying to disperse that through microservices. So for some of you who may not be aware what those things are, provide some links in this video. But really, we're taking a single application, instead of hosting it all within the single VM and the single code, we're splitting that up into single separate functions, splitting them up and throwing them across different, typically deployed in what's called a containers. So what are some concerns you have perhaps around containerization and microservices, and what are some methods maybe you've actually deployed or thought about for mitigating some of those risks?
So I think there's some trade-offs. One of the big things from a cybersecurity side that is a benefit is the amount of persistence you have with infrastructure. So having something that lives forever is not necessarily a good thing. You have to always worry about the integrity of that system, versus if it's only living for fractions of a second, then you have less to worry about the underlying infrastructure. You can then focus your cybersecurity efforts around the application and less around the underlying compute. So like typically what I would see as part of like an attack chain or attack lifecycle is compromising the underlying system through that application, gaining access to it, and then escalating privileges, moving on from there, right? But if you can build your application so that there's a lack of persistent infrastructure behind it, then that's just one less thing to need to focus on continuously, right? You can still get those controls in, and it's still important, but you have less reliance on uptime, so you can focus more on how do you get the patches there frequently, how do you remediate vulnerabilities closer to real time, versus something like weekly, monthly, quarterly, which I think is very typical of a lot of organizations. So if you can leverage the lack of persistence to deploy things faster, I think there's some huge benefits to doing so. Where it becomes harder is you're having less of a focus on the server and deployment of a tool. In some cases, you can still deploy your agents, but that can definitely be a limiting factor as well. So you still want to get a level of visibility, but you're not as focused on the underlying infrastructure.
Very well said. I hadn't really considered that, but yeah, you're right. It makes sense, right? Because these containers or these microservices are typically going to be very ephemeral, very short-lived.
And I think I've seen some other tools that I've used in the past. So like there's some great frameworks out there. Stride is one that I think Microsoft released several years ago. And you can really focus on the application type security. Where are your trust boundaries? How do you do authorization, authentication? How are those separate? How do you handle those? And really understanding that from like a cloud perspective and where your trust boundaries are can go a long way. And I think focusing more on the development of them will save you a lot of money versus coming at the end. Like not everything's about the control. Some of it's about how you architect it, and you work with your developers to understand the business logic behind that application. If you can focus your efforts there, that can go a long way as well.
We touched on this a little bit already in some of the previous conversation around cloud sprawl and integration with our development and application teams. So part of my question for you was, have you had any success or experience with integrating into what would be called most typically the software development lifecycle? So it certainly sounds like you have, because we've talked a little bit already about implementing controls, implementing processes, working with those teams to build those into the early stages of their pipeline and not try to introduce friction or locks and barriers after the fact. One of the things you touched on, which I really appreciate and I like, I'm wondering if you could elaborate on, how do you work with them so well? What are some of the best practices or some of the things you might suggest to build that bridge between those two teams? Because that seems to always be a common source of friction in the organizations that I've worked with.
Mm-hmm. So I think the big thing is you have to kind of go into it knowing a different perspective other than just cybersecurity. So one thing you'll need is buy-in from those groups. And I think one of the immediate concerns is, well, how much red tape is this going to add to my development process? How much you're going to slow us down? And you still want to hold people accountable for putting the right controls in. But first you'll need to get the buy-in. So work with like the leaders of those teams. And I think going into it, planning a few different things will set you up for success. So try and instrument as much as you can. So make it repeatable, easy to do. So you invest a bit of time once or twice. Then you make that consistent across the board so that you minimize the friction or effort that's involved there. Have in mind what controls you want to have in place, and then try and make them as quick and easy as possible to execute on, and try and make them non-manual as well. So like you have to look, if you look at a whole development lifecycle, you've got the design of the code, the architecting of it, the development of it, the implementation of it, and then it goes into production. So what I found is that typically becomes very costly if you come in at the very end, test it, slow someone down, and then just give them a report of what they have to fix before they can launch a service. Versus if you pick and choose, first understand what the frequency of code development and release is, automate your instrumentation of any tooling that you're using, get the centralized visibility if you can, and then set your stage gates so that the right controls go in at the right times. And then the earlier you can identify a problem and report on it, the easier it's going to be to fix it. So it takes a little bit of time to build up a framework like this, but there's lots of documentation on what types of controls are a good fit, dial in the fundamentals, get the buy-in, and make the transparency of your controls in there as well. That'll go a long way. So that's what I found to have worked for me is try to latch onto the things that are already working for those groups. So metrics.
That'll help a lot of people, right? Because at the end of the day, if you're coming in and just thinking about posing new rules, you may have executive buy-in to make something like that happen, but the chances of that being successful in the long run seem pretty slim.
If you enable some of the teams to self-identify issues, then it becomes a lot cheaper to fix those problems as well. So let's say you've got development groups if you can spend a bit of time learning how to threat model with them, pick a methodology, and then if you get them to, like, let's say you want to have them develop at a certain interval for features or product or whatever, if you can have them run through their own threat model and discuss within their own teams, and they can do that whenever works for them in that early development lifecycle, and you're just coming and working with them after, it becomes so much more effective. So you're kind of doing with them versus to them. You'll probably find a lot more like there's a lot of brilliant software developers and software engineers out there. And when you start to task them with those different responsibilities, like they'll learn them, they'll pick them up, and you can start to consume that as a service versus pushing a control onto them. You start to consume their ideas for how they can start to secure these different functions.
If you had to pick, what would be the biggest challenge associated with cybersecurity in the public cloud space?
I think you've probably already touched on it earlier, but the sprawl can be difficult. So it depends on how big your organization is. But let's say you've got 30 different teams and you wanted to take this model and apply it everywhere. We're doing, stuff like threat modeling, security architecture, instrumenting your controls, measuring what's there, understanding the business logic behind your applications. That can be pretty hard to scale. Scaling is the toughest part, as you'll need a certain level of buy-in from leadership to build that out, right? And that can be difficult, depends on your org, right? Some it's easier than others, but that I would say is the most difficult point. I think back in the day, the harder element was getting controls in, maybe not having enough people. People are too busy, I would say, were the traditional challenges I've seen. Mm-hmm. Whereas now it's not hard to get the tooling anymore. It's easier to get the services in, but you've got more groups from what I've seen in different organizations that are operating kind of in pockets, delivering products. So to do that at scale is something you have to do as well. So one of the best ways is, I think, trying to find like a security champion. So like if there's someone within those teams that wants to pick up more of an active role, you build up other individuals that can take on some of those responsibilities and help you deliver that capability. Operating in pockets can be difficult.
One of the things that I see quite a bit of, and I guess expands the scope of this problem, but whether it's a security team, networking team, very, very infrequently that this will happen to an application team, but taking the same methodologies that they had on-prem with them into the cloud. So they're not adopting any sort of automation. They're trying to architect things just like they did on-prem. You're losing most of the value that you're getting from the cloud provider, and the agility and the security and all of these other things that you can really be taking advantage of. And you're just throwing that to the side in favor of sticking to your old ways, so to speak. So I've seen that unfortunately a lot. And for me, that's up there on the list of things that biggest challenges, right, is really changing your mindset to adopt some of this cloud native tooling and adopt some of the benefits that are associated with the cloud provider, because that's when you're going to start to reap these benefits that we've already talked about today. Certainly do my best to evangelize those customers and those people to rethink and to change their mindset to treat this as something different than what they know.
Totally. I think there's elements that transfer well, like in terms of fundamentals, but in terms of tooling, I totally agree with you. Trying to take exactly the way you did things on-prem and transferring that becomes costly. It'll slow you down. You don't get those benefits. Like, I think in some ways we can kind of be our own worst enemy.
Yeah.
Versus if you take and it takes time, right? To rethink cloud security and rethink how you deliver business value through technology.
Yeah.
But I honestly think, in my view, I think you can actually get better security in the cloud than you can on-prem if you do it right. In my mind, I think it's probably easier. Can you leverage your new technology or your new cloud environment to do things you couldn't have done before? And I think from what I've seen, the answer is yes.
Artificial intelligence, machine learning, these buzzwords are coming up more and more and more from the vendor community. As a result, they're talked about more, and they're somewhat treated as, panacea of, these are going to solve all my problems. This is what I need. If I can only tap into some AI, I'm going to need less people, or I'm going to need to manage less risk. How much of that at this point anyway is just fancy marketing? And do you see this technology being mature enough at this stage for being implemented as part of a cybersecurity program?
It's a really good question. I see it a lot. And sometimes the buzzwords drive me nuts too. So I think that the big thing there is I see a very clear distinction between AI and machine learning. And trying to sell one as the other is, I think, frustrating as someone that's very passionate about the technology and how we deliver certain outcomes. Yeah. But I think the problem is machine learning isn't very sexy. AI is very sexy. And those two are related domains, in my opinion. But from what I've seen, in most cases, when they advertise AI, really it's machine learning. And I see benefits to it. So I think that and today I think we've got kind of a mix. We've got technology and you've got people. But I just think we have to have technology doing more of the automation or routine functions and humans making more human intelligent decisions versus trying to blend those responsibilities and not maximizing both capabilities. I think one thing that we kind of touched on earlier is like the community side of things. So I think overall, even if it's not just within cybersecurity, but I think generally speaking, cybersecurity and IT, we have to build a better community overall. And I think we have to really help level people up that want to get into the field, really help each other, regardless of skills or interests. I think we could be a much stronger community if we are a little more positive, help each other out. There's a lot of negative groups online. It's a tough time right now in 2020. It's been a crazy year, but overall, I think we're going to start to see better outcomes as an industry if we can build a better community around that. If we can start to build out kind of wider versus level up individually, I think we can do a lot more.
Do you have any recommendations, or it sounds cheesy, but call to actions from anybody watching this on how they can better support or enable this community to, as you say, level up and grow wider? Let's all grow together. Let's all learn from each other. So what would be some of the calls to actions or requests that you'd have for some of the people watching?
I think we have to figure out how to give back a bit more. So like a few things I could think of is, I'm quite guilty of this. I'm like a Reddit lurker, not really a poster, but there's a fantastic NetSec community that's up there posting content. So I think contributing with some of the online communities is really powerful. Work with like communities local. So like in Calgary, we have CowSec in the cybersecurity community, like fantastic group. And there's always other groups that are expanding as well. So I think participating, helping out, joining some of these different workshops, having conversations like these, all go a long way in my opinion.
When it comes to people who may be watching this, Brett, who, for example, feel like after watching this interview, they would really like to talk to you further and get some more advice or just pick your brain, maybe they're getting into cybersecurity for the first time. Is there a preferred way for them to get a hold of you?
Oh, yeah. So best way to get a hold of me is through my LinkedIn. So just search Brett Hacking and let's connect and have a conversation.
Awesome.
Well, thanks for having me, Kyle. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks very much for being on our inaugural episode of A Slice of Security. Got to chow on some pizza. Brett gave it a 7.8, I believe. Good pizza, great conversation. Hopefully a lot of what we touched on is very relevant to those of you who are watching this. We tried to cover off as much as we could in the cloud, public cloud specifically, cybersecurity space, how we manage some of the risk. How do we manage the interactions with other teams to be successful? What got Brett into the industry, and some general cybersecurity questions. So once again, Brett, really appreciate your time. It was been a lot of fun, an honor to have this interview, this very first one with you, and hopefully we can chat again soon.
Thanks for having me, Kyle.
I would like to once again extend my gratitude to Brett for joining us on our inaugural episode. Some excellent points were raised with respect to cybersecurity in the public cloud, including how we can best integrate with the application and development teams to ensure that our security controls are not being bypassed or adding needless friction. We also had a very interesting conversation about the risk versus reward in the public cloud. Thank you for watching A Slice of Security. Please hit that subscribe button, and also don't forget to turn on notifications to ensure you're notified of future episodes and content. Also, don't forget to comment with your answers to this episode's questions, as well as provide your feedback and any ideas for future topics, content, or pizza reviews.